All right. Welcome to the Manufactured Home Community Redevelopment Program Technical Assistance webinar. This presentation will start with a brief introduction, provide an overview of the Manufactured Home Community Redevelopment Program and the eligibility and grant requirements, and then we'll go into details about what is needed to apply for the 2022 Request for Proposals, or RFP, and I will walk through completing an application. With any presentation, we always start with the mission of Minnesota Housing. Housing is the foundation for success, so we collaborate with individuals, communities, and partners to create, preserve, and finance housing that is affordable. The Manufactured Home Community Redevelopment Program reflects many aspects of this mission. I would also like to introduce myself. My name is Annie Ryerson. I am the Manufactured Housing Programs Manager at the agency. I manage the grant program that we will be discussing today, as well as the Manufactured Housing Relocation Trust Fund, and I generally coordinate activities related to manufactured housing that are conducted throughout the agency in order to develop a comprehensive strategy surrounding the needs of manufactured housing communities in Minnesota. The Manufactured Home Community Redevelopment Program is a state grant program that was established in 2020 and designed to meet the needs of aging manufactured home communities in Minnesota by providing funds to address health, safety, and critical need improvements of communities through infrastructure redevelopment or acquisition of manufactured home parks. The program is currently funded with $3.75 million in state appropriations, as well as an additional $15 million set aside in housing infrastructure bond proceeds that are available until January 2024. Depending on qualifying proposals and available funding, the agency anticipates funding around $10 million in projects for the 2022 RFP. The grant funds can be used for either infrastructure improvements or acquisition of a manufactured home park. Infrastructure improvements include, but are not limited to, water and sewer upgrades, road repairs, or storm shelters. The funds must be used for activities that benefit the community as a whole and must be used on new projects, and also must benefit year-round residential lots in the community. The funds cannot be used on work that has already been started or completed in the past. Funds also cannot be used to purchase or repair individual manufactured homes. And any lots that are delegated for seasonal purposes are not eligible. And awarded funds would be adjusted for subdivided parks. You can apply for funds through this grant program if you privately own a manufactured home community, either as an individual or a corporate entity. You can also apply if the community is cooperatively owned, if the community is owned by a government or a tribal entity, or a nonprofit organization that is applying for funds on behalf of a community as an intermediary. If an intermediary is applying, the grant funds are still awarded to the property owner themselves. The community must have year-round residents, and fully seasonal parks are not eligible to apply, regardless of the ownership type. Residents of the community are not required to provide income documentation. However, the lot rents of the park must be affordable to resident households who are at or below 115% of the area median income. Those income limits are listed on this slide. If you have documentation that illustrates lower income residents in your community, you are encouraged to submit that with your application, and I will talk about that more later in this presentation. Applicants are asked to provide lot rent information with their proposals, which are calculated internally at the agency with consideration around what utilities or services are included in the lot rent, as well as the size of the homes on the lots. The average lot rent of $350 per month is well within the range of affordability. So unless your lot rents are over twice that amount, you wouldn't need to worry about meeting this requirement of the grant. If you are awarded funds through this program, you must sign a grant contract and agree to the terms of the contract before requesting payments. Contract templates are found on the Office of Grants Management's website, and a link to the website can be found on the same web page where you find the application for this program, which I will go through in detail a little bit later. The grant term is 3 years, which means funds must be distributed and projects must be completed within 3 years of signing the contract. Grantees must also sign a declaration of restricted covenants to be filed with the county in which the manufactured home park is located. The grantee must agree to the terms of an affordability period, which I will discuss on the next slide. A copy of the declaration document is also found on the Minnesota Housing website. I encourage any applicant to review these documents and terms carefully prior to submitting an application. The terms of the affordability period on the declaration of restricted covenants include the following. The property must remain a manufactured home park for 25 years. During the affordability period, lot rents cannot increase more than 5% annually without written approval from Minnesota Housing. The park owner must establish a replacement reserves account for improvement repairs. The park owner does not need to remain the owner for 25 years, but any sale or transfer of ownership must also be approved by Minnesota Housing. And the grantee must agree to monitoring activities, such as verifying that the grant funds are being used for the activities listed in the proposal. So this concludes the program overview portion of this presentation. Additional program information and details can be found in the program manual that is found on the same Minnesota Housing webpage where the application is found. Again, I will show you that shortly. I recommend that you read through the manual completely prior to submitting an application. The application for the 2022 RFP is currently open, and completed applications are due by 12 o'clock noon on Monday, October 3rd. Once the application closes, Minnesota Housing staff, along with community reviewers, will review and score each proposal. Highest scoring proposals will be recommended for funding to the agency's board of directors, and selected proposals are expected to be approved at the December 2022 board meeting. If you are awarded funds, you will be notified after that board meeting. So now I will talk a little bit about the scoring of the proposals, and then I will go into detail about how to apply for the funds. So the proposals will be scored using the following 6 categories. Not every proposal will score high in every category. So if one of these categories does not fully apply to your proposal, do not let that dissuade you from applying for funds. This is a competitive grant process, and your total overall score will be used for funding recommendations. The first scoring category is community needs. So infrastructure redevelopment proposals will be scored based on the health and safety needs of the community. And acquisition proposals will be scored based on projects that benefit the community or prevent closure of a park. The next scoring category is household served, and proposals with this category will be assessed on the affordability of the lot rents, which I discussed earlier. And proposals will score higher if they benefit lower income households or typically underserved communities, such as Black, Indigenous, or households of color, senior residents, or residents with disabilities. The third category is community support. So proposals that have strong support from the local community, such as leverage from the city, county, or even a local business or employer, will receive a higher score. Communities that are converting private utilities to public utilities will also receive additional points in this category. And then if you have the support from any other local entity, like a housing organization or nonprofit, or any other type of support from a city or county entity, in any other manner, you can receive additional points in this category as well. Proposals will also be scored on overall project leverage and costs. So if there is additional leverage that's included in the project that might not come from community support, would also be included in the scoring. So this could be the park owner's own financial contribution or another type of private investor in the project, or any kind of other financing that's being used to pay for the project activities. The cost compared to the number of lots in the community are also considered in this category. The fifth category is project assessment. So proposals will be scored on how well the cost estimates are documented, how well planned the project is, and how reasonable the timeline of the project is. The proposal does not have to have selected bids at the time of application, although it's okay if it does. But applications that have a documented reasonable cost estimate will receive a higher score. And then the final category is project experience. So this category will look at the experience of the people involved in the project, including but not limited to contractors or project managers or engineers. So I will be going over each question in the application to provide more details about the questions that relate to each of these categories. In addition to answering the questions in the application, applicants of the program must also provide the documents listed on the application checklist, which is found on Minnesota Housing's website. I recommend collecting these documents before completing the questions on the application, especially if you plan to use the online application. It just makes it easier to submit everything if you have these documents organized ahead of time. These documents include submitting the checklist itself, the narrative application. There's an online version of the narrative that I will demonstrate today. There is also a paper version that you can download if you do not have access to internet to complete an online application. Either version is fine. You do not have to complete both versions of the narrative. So if you're doing the online questions, that satisfies the checklist item on this document. You will also need to sign a signature page and agree to the terms on that document, as well as an entity-informed consent form. You will have to include any kind of documentation that supports how you estimate the cost of your project, whether that is contractor bids or an engineer's report or some other method of cost evaluation, as well as the scope of work planned for your project. The scope of work doesn't need to be finalized at this stage, but it's just a preliminary overview of what activities are included in your project proposal. You will also need to include a timeline for your project, and this can be in any format. You can use a Gantt chart if you have a more complicated project, or you can just write out a timeline on a Word document or any other method that works for you. There are also credit review requirements, which include the credit review form that is found on the Minnesota Housing website. And the documents listed on that form, such as tax returns, must also be submitted. There is a different credit review form for nonprofit organizations and for-profit organizations. So you only need to complete the form that applies to you and the type of entity that is applying for the grant. And I will be going over the documents on the website shortly, so hopefully that will make more sense in a moment. Applications also need to include the most recent health inspection of the park from the Department of Health, a copy of the park owner's license to operate the park, and 3 months of recent rent rolls to verify the lot rents in the community. Photographs are not required, but it is recommended to provide a photo of the park or an aerial map to help understand the layout of the park. That can just be helpful with trying to understand the project activities from the folks who review and score the applications. If you are applying for funds for an acquisition project, then you must also include a commitment letter for any additional financing you have, the purchase contract, and an appraisal that illustrates the value of the park. Please also note that there is an additional document checklist on the credit review form, and the documents are different depending on what type of entity owns the manufactured home park. So be sure to submit the documents on the credit review checklist along with the credit review form, in addition to the application checklist. To find the application materials for this program, you can go to the website mnhousing.gov and select the link for community development, and then select the tab for manufactured housing, and that will bring you to the application page. Or you can go to the web page listed on this slide, which is mnhousing.gov/sites/lenders/manufactured housing. This will bring you to the page that has both the online and paper versions of the application. There are also instructions for completing the application checklist, the signature page, and the other documents that are required to submit a proposal, as well as the templates for the grant contracts and the declaration document that I mentioned earlier. So this is what the list of documents looks like on the website. And I will take a moment now to show you the documents and where to find them. To complete the online application, you would just click the link that says 2022 Request for Proposal RFP online application, and that will pull up the online questions, and I will demonstrate that shortly as well. So this is what Minnesota Housing's website looks like. And you just click on community development here, kind of in the middle of the page. And then you click on this tab that says manufactured housing. And then everything under the manufactured home community redevelopment program is listed here. And then to expand these topics, you just click on the little plus sign. So the application materials and forms, you click on that, and that has the list of all the documents that are needed. So when you click on each link, it'll give you an option to open up each document. So this is the application guide and instructions, which basically covers the information that I've been covering today. It's just in writing, so this is a good reference. And there's some links on here to bring you to some of the pages that are referenced as well. And then there's the application checklist. There's the paper narrative. If you want to fill that out instead of completing the online application, whatever is easiest for you. It just takes a moment to open. And then the scoring metrics are listed on the website here. And then when this presentation is completed, there'll be a link here to review the recorded presentation if you want to look at that for reference as well. And then this is what the paper version of the application looks like. I'll go through the online application as well. But each of these fields are fillable, so you can just type your answers directly into any of the questions to submit the application that way. All right, and then I will show you what the online application looks like. So this is when you click on the link, this is what the page looks like. And I'll go through all the questions through the online application as well. So this application for the demo, I started earlier. So once you start an application, you can exit it at any time. There's no save button. But then when you go back to it and put in your information, it'll ask you if you want to resume. So you can start your application and come back to it later. And so long as you're using the same name and email address, it'll ask you to resume your responses. So that's what I've done here. So this is the last page. I'll have to go back to the beginning here. Give me a moment. All right, so the first page will just ask you for your name and your email and your phone number. The second page, you'll put in the name of the manufactured home park that would be receiving the funds, as well as the ownership entity. So whoever owns that manufactured home park. So my made up park for the demo here is Minnesota Great Manufactured Home Community. And then the entity that owns it is MN Great MHC LLC. If you're an intermediary organization applying for the funds, you can put in your information here as well, and whoever is the primary contact person. For this application, I'm not having an intermediary. And then it will ask you the ownership structure. at the time of application and at project completion. So for this one, it's a privately owned park, and it will remain a privately owned park by the end of the project. This park has 50 lots. There are 5 vacant, 5 rented homes, and then 40 homeowners, and no seasonal homes. But you can just fill out the information that's relevant to your park and click next. And for this project, I'm applying for $500,000, although the total project costs would be $1 million for what I'm proposing here. And I'm proposing something for infrastructure redevelopment. And then my project will include water and sewer systems and a storm shelter. And then there's a couple things you can select here, or if you have additional work. These are just kind of the most common improvements that we see, but you can always type in manually if you have additional activities that aren't listed. So for my water and sewer system, I'm looking to replace the system completely. And it's a large enough system that it would require an SSTS permit. And it asks you for the estimated gallons of water per day that pass through the system. And then for my storm shelter, I'm looking for a new construction, or if I was repairing an existing one, you could select that as well. And then there's a question on how will you monitor the use of grant proceeds to ensure all improvements are completed diligently and in compliance with all applicable state and local requirements. So for the demo, this project will be partnering with the city and an engineering firm to ensure that all work is completed in compliance with all the requirements. And then there's a question if you've ever been involved in litigation with a park community member, board, or representative. So you can explain that if there's been litigation in the past with the owner or not. And then you just click next. So at the top of these pages, you'll see the scoring categories. So these are all the questions that are relevant to the categories that I mentioned earlier. So for community needs, the questions are describe the manufactured housing community. Is it a residential year-round park? Are there areas of the park that are seasonal? And then describe any unique aspects of the park, the residents, or the community. So this first question, we're really looking for a general overview of what the park is like, where it's located, who are the people who live there, what's unique about this community, and how it's important to the community at large around the park. And then the next question is how will your project benefit the manufactured housing community? So you can describe in detail what the needs of the park are and how the funds will be used to address those needs. So for this proposal, we're looking at a water and sewer system and a storm shelter. So I would, write a detailed response about why the water and sewer system is needed and why the storm shelter is needed in particular, and how that would improve the community. And then are there any immediate or critical health and safety issues that need to be addressed in the park? So then you would describe those here. And, with water and sewer systems, if there's any indication that the water isn't safe or would become unsafe if the system wasn't repaired, you would want to describe that. Or if there's a problem with the sewer system that's creating health and safety needs for the residents, you would want to describe that. And then storm shelters, if there isn't a storm shelter in the community, that's obviously a safety issue when inclement weather occurs. So you would just describe that. Or if you have another type of solution that just isn't ideal for the residents, you can describe what the current situation is in the community, and then how this new storm shelter would benefit the residents. And then there's a question, is there a risk that the park will close or that the property will be converted to another use if this project is not completed? And you can say yes or no, and then if yes, describe your answer on what that risk would be as well. And then the next category is for households served. So it asks you what the lot rents are per month, and then what services or utilities are included in the lot rent. So make sure that you describe everything that's included in the lot rent. This question does say complete the applicant workbook, but there is no workbook. That was something that we used in the past, but it wasn't user-friendly, so we just took that out of the application. So please ignore that. I apologize for the error in the question. But do please describe what's included in the lot rent, especially if it's not clear on the rent rolls, if there are additional utilities, or if you have different lot rents for different size homes as well, you can describe that here. And then there's a question if lot rents have increased more than 5% per year within the previous 3 years. And if yes, just answer this question of how often the lot rents increase, and then the process for calculating increases. And then there's a few questions about the residents who live in the manufactured home park. So for this demo, the park owner sent out a survey to the residents living in the community, and that's how this information was collected. I think that's a great method to answer some of these questions. You know, you don't have to require that everyone respond, but if you do get responses to a survey, that's a helpful way to just report back on how the residents describe themselves. So you could ask your residents, you know, what they report as their household income for the year. And then there's another question to describe the people who live in the community and provide any documentation that you have that illustrates, you know, the ranges of incomes. And if you don't use a survey, if you have that information from tenant applications or any kind of city or county data, you can use that as well. But I think sometimes the most current information is just to ask the residents themselves. Again, you can't require that they respond, but even if you get a good sampling of the people who live in the community, that can be helpful to answer some of these questions. And then as well as what are the demographics of the people living in the community? And do the residents represent any typically underserved communities such as Black, Indigenous, or people of color, people with disabilities, immigrant communities, senior residents, or any of those demographics. So you can describe that here. And if you just know the residents personally, you can also describe that as well without doing a survey. But again, it's a survey is a useful way to just hear from the residents themselves on how they describe themselves. Right, the next category then is community support. So the questions for this category are describe how the surrounding community is involved in the project. Is a local government, nonprofit, or community organization involved in the acquisition or infrastructure improvements? So a lot of times cities will be involved in portions of a project. So you could describe that here, or if you have another local housing organization that's helping with the grant process, you can put in their involvement. If you have any letters of recommendation that you want to include in your application, you could describe that in these questions as well, and then include copies of the letter in your application. And then the next question is describe the role of the role the park community plays in the town, city, county, or region, and what efforts, if any, have you personally made to bolster this role. So then here you would talk about the importance of the manufactured home park as it relates to the surrounding communities. So, you know, if there aren't a lot of other manufactured housing communities around, or if this is really a place that residents rely on for an affordable place to live, like that's a great place to highlight those aspects with this question. And then anything else that the park owner does to kind of engage with the surrounding community. You can put in examples here. And then there's a question, is any portion of the project funded by a local municipality or another entity in the community? So if you're receiving additional funds from a city or another local organization, you can put in the financial contribution here. And then will the city or local organization be contributing resources, discounts, or waivers to help with project costs? So that's another type of support rather than just direct funds. If there's any other kind of discounts or waivers that are included, you can put that there. And then are any of the utilities in the park public utilities at the time of application, or will any utilities be converted to public utilities by the project completion? So that would be another way of receiving community support, is just through having public utilities. So again, not all of these topics are going to apply to every proposal, but this just gives you more opportunities to receive additional scores in this category by the many different types of community support. So if one of these questions doesn't apply to you, that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're not eligible to receive funds. It's just having the different ways of receiving community support gives you more opportunities to receive scoring in this category. And then the last question is, does the park have a resident association or other body representing the residents of the manufactured home park? And if it does, yes, then there's a follow-up question where how will you engage this body in the process of identifying or carrying out needed infrastructure improvements? And if you don't have a resident association, that's okay too. And then there's just a follow-up question that says, how will you identify concerns or priorities of the residents as it relates to your project? So if there are other things that the residents have had concerns about with the state of their community, you know, how have you engaged residents to get their feedback as well? Right, and then the next category covers project leverage and costs. So here it says, what are the total estimated costs of the project, including the grant funds you are applying for? And if there are multiple activities in your project, describe how the costs are determined. So for this demo, we're saying that the water and sewer system will cost $700,000 and the storm shelter will cost $300,000 for a total of $1 million for the total project. And then if you have cost estimates, you can describe what you have and then just refer to that in your answer. And then the next question is, what other sources of funding are you using for the project? So describe the dollar amounts and where the funds are coming from. So for this example, we would have $500,000 from Minnesota Housing Grant, $100,000 from a city grant. We're saying $100,000 in reserves from the manufactured home park owner, and then an additional $300,000 in financing. So, you know, this will change from project to project, but just lay out, you know, how much the total project costs and any other type of supplemental funding that would be included. Then the next question is, are the funds in hand at the time of application, or are they anticipated, and provide a copy of any commitment letters or documents that illustrate the leverage for this project. So if you have a commitment letter for any other grants, or a bank statement if you're using cash on hand, or if you're using financing, if you have an approval letter from a financial institution, those are all examples of things that you could include in your application to show where other funds are coming from. And then the last question in this category is, if you are not awarded this grant, how will your project change? For example, will you pursue other funding sources? Will you eliminate a portion of the project, et cetera? So one example is, if this grant is not awarded, the park owner will still use the city funds, reserves, and additional financing to complete a portion of the project, that can complete the water and sewer system, and then create a budget to complete the storm shelter within the next 5 years. And then you could go into detail about how you plan to do that. But just whatever your contingency plans are if you are not awarded the grant funds. All right, and then there's 2 more categories, project assessment and project experience. There's 2 questions for each of these categories. So just, how have the costs of the project been determined? Describe who has been involved with determining the costs, and include a copy of any assessments that you have. So whether you're working with a contractor or an engineer firm or whatever it is, just describe who did the cost assessments and then attach any documentation there. And then describe the timeline. So when you expect the work to begin and when you anticipate the work to be completed, and then you can include a copy of your timeline document as well. And just a reminder that this is a 3-year grant, and that the timeline should reflect a 3-year period or less for the funds to be dispersed. It would be okay if your project was longer than 3 years, so long as you documented how your additional funding would come into play after the grant funds were dispersed as well. And then the category for project experience, describe the experience of any contractors, appraisers, engineers, consultants, et cetera, selected for this project. Include any applicable licenses or certifications that any of the parties involved have in order to complete the project. And then also describe here how and why the contractors, appraisers, engineers, consultants were selected for the project, and what was the basis for selecting those companies or entities. And then the last page of the application gives you some boxes where you can drop in your files. So the first one is going to be the checklist, and you can either go to the website and download that to your computer, or there's a link here to that document. If you have other documents, for your cost estimates or letters of support or survey from your residents or anything like that, you can drop those here. And then there's an entity informed consent form that you also need to sign that can be dropped here, and then a signature page that needs to be signed and dropped here. So to drop a file, all you need to do is save the form to your computer, and you can drag it over that square. Oh, there's already one here. So this one only lets you upload one document for each category, and I'll show you how you can send additional documents as well in a minute. Go down here and drop this one here. So when you drop a file, then it will show up in a gray line underneath. And when you're finished, then you just select finish, and that submits your application. After you select finish, you can go back and edit the application as well. So whether you finish it or not at this point, you could just X out and then go back to the website and click on the link again and put in your name and email address, and you can resume the application. Or even if you select finish, you can do the same thing. You can go back and make edits later. So you don't have to worry about if you think of something later that you want to add to your application and you've already submitted it, you can go back and make edits up until the due date time on October 3rd at noon. And that's when the application will be closed for any additional edits. All right, so if you do not want to complete the online application, or if you have additional attachments to include in your application, you can upload your documents through Minnesota Housing's Secure File Exchange, which you can access by clicking on the partner login link in the top right corner of the home page, and that will bring you to the page on this slide. And then select the link for the single family secure file exchange in the middle of the page. And then you would select secure upload and then enter the email mhfa.homeimprovement@state.mn.us. And that would send any of your documents to this inbox, which is a secure inbox. So if you have tax returns or anything with sensitive information on it that you don't want to send just through regular email, you can send to this inbox through the secure file exchange. So when you click on that link, this is what shows up. So you would enter your name and your email address, and then in the subject, type MHCR, the name of your park, and then 2022 RFP in the subject line. And then in the message, just be sure to put in my name, just write to Annie Ryerson, and then describe what you're uploading, whether it's a complete application, and this is how you just want to submit your entire application, or if it's an attachment to the online application, then put that in the message here that you've completed the application online, and then these are just supplemental documents. And then at the bottom of the screen, you can find a few options to upload either one attachment or multiple attachments, depending on the size of your document. So it'll give you the size limits here, and then you'll be able to upload your documents and send them securely. And then if you want to stay informed about additional updates to the Manufactured Home Community Redevelopment Program, you can join Minnesota Housing e-news by clicking on the link on the bottom right corner of the homepage of our website. There's e-news sign up. And then when you click on that link, select single family community development programs when you sign up, and then any updates that we send out to the public for this program would be included on that email list. For any other questions regarding your application or any other questions about the program, please feel free to contact me at any time. My direct phone number is 651-296-3495. My email is Annie, ANNIE, .Ryerson, REIERSON, @state.mn.us. I'm happy to set aside time to meet with you one-on-one to talk about your proposal if you would like, or answer any other technical assistance questions. There's also a general inbox for mnhousing.manufacturedhomes@state.mn.us for any other questions related to manufactured housing for Minnesota Housing.